welcome to the Castle of Spirits True Ghost Stories podcast. I'm the Ghost Keeper Vince.
And I'm the Ghost Keeper Jane.
And together we are the keepers of the spirits of the Castle of Spirits. If I can be redundant, I will do it any opportunity I get, apparently. And today we're going to read you some scary stories because that's what we do.
That is what we do.
And that's what we enjoy doing.
And you enjoy listening to it. Otherwise, why are you here?
If you keep saying it over and over, they will eventually believe it.
I mean, they keep coming back, so we must have them on the hook.
We must. So Jane.
Yes.
As Ghost Keeper, do you have any stories to share?
You know that I do.
From the library archives.
Mm-hmm. This one was actually mentioned, requested, I guess, in a YouTube comment. Remember that you can check us out on YouTube. Just search Castle of Spirits. We've got our podcast episodes with some little spooky images going around with them. It's nothing too fancy, but
you do not have to suffer
mood setting.
my mug.
Oh boy.
These are just really cool, relaxing images. So,
but this story was brought up in a comment on one of our YouTube videos. So I thought, what the heck? It is scary as hell. So I'm going to read it.
All right.
So this story is called Wild Eyes, and it was submitted in New York, USA in January of 2000. To think of the look in this person's eyes still gives me the creeps and makes my eyes water with fear to this day. My twin was picking me up at work late one evening. I was at my office finishing a paper for school and all alone in my tiny office in a small business district by an airport strip in the middle of the desert. As we turned out the driveway, we followed the last bit of paved road before we hit a traffic light that would lead us to the deserted road that we traveled home on. As we approached the light, we were listening to a good Allman Brothers or Santana song and having a good old time singing and grooving and just being teenagers. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a car pull up next to us, the only other one than us on the deserted road, and I casually glanced over. Man, the face still haunts me. As I looked over, the person in the car next to us had a very pale, almost translucent face and wild, curly black hair. Her hands were clenched to the steering wheel, and her face was completely turned to face us. She had a disturbing smile, very large white teeth, and the edges of her mouth seemed to engulf the whole bottom portion of her face. Her eyes were hollow black and piercing. I didn't see any whites in them, only large, black, and freaky. I was really scared and told my twin to look over at the person in the car next to us. She freaked out and we took off. The car effortlessly kept pace with us. Each time I looked over, the person was still staring at us, never taking her eyes off of us and not looking at the road from what I could see. The car she was driving seemed to be floating at the same force of speed as ours. We tried to lose her, but couldn't. The tiny dirt road was narrow and bumpy and pitch dark. We finally turned down a side road and she was gone. To this day, when my sister and I speak of that woman, we get tears in our eyes. Who was she? Why was she smiling so wide? And why were her eyes so dark and piercing and prominent? Sometimes I'll tell the story to friends and try to imitate her face. I freak them out every time. I can't explain what happened. Maybe the lady was just a strange person. Maybe more. So thank you again to Anonymous in New York, USA for submitting that insanely terrifying story, Wild Eyes, in January of 2000.
Oh my God.
Right?
That sounds like a scene straight out of
a terrifying movie.
Carnival of Souls.
Oh, yeah.
Where you look over, she's the actress in the movie. She's driving down a lonely desert road on her way into Utah.
Yep.
And she looks to the right and there is face of a ghoul just staring right back at her like he's keeping up pace with her.
And it just I can picture it. They described it so well, and I can just picture this terrifying woman's face. You know, the way they say that her skin was very white and almost translucent with the black hair. And, you know, when it's really dark like that, you kind of picture her face almost like glowing in the car next to it, making the black holes for eyes even more black and
all right,
hole-like.
Stop. You're freaking me out now. The story did enough, but, you know.
It was a very, very good story.
If it was darker in here to be looking back over my shoulder.
There's just a wall behind. What is on that wall?
Oh, my God. You know, I was talking to my nephew.
Mm-hmm.
He's a cop
Mm-hmm.
in California.
Yeah.
And he said that part of his, I guess, gig or duties or whatever you call it, is that at night they have to go and patrol these roads that are out in the middle of nowhere where there's like no cell phone or coverage, you know,
Yeah.
it's like blackout areas where if somebody happens to be in distress, nobody would find them. And I guess as part of their patrol, they go out there and they drive these scary back roads.
That sounds awesome.
And I told him,
never
I said,
wanted to be a cop more in my life than right this second.
Right. I said that would have been a perfect place to listen to an old Art Bell episode. But of course, there was also no radio
or the Castle of
signals.
Spirits, True Stories podcast. True Ghost
I did.
Stories podcast.
I did try to sneak in a plug with him
Mhm.
for that, and
He better listen to our podcast,
hopefully,
or I'll
hopefully.
arrest him. Oh, that's not how that works.
But anyway, I am interested in stories that law officers, peace officers, people who
Mm-hmm.
patrol the nights have, because they have these experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to old Art Bell episodes, sometimes the best calls would come from cops.
Yeah.
That used to be on the graveyard shift, or maybe EMTs.
Yeah. So any cops listening, we want your stories.
Or firemen.
Or firemen.
EMTs.
All of it.
Late night workers at
Mhm.
7-Elevens
Mm-hmm.
on the outskirts of town. Reach out to us. Tell us spooky things. And speaking of spooky things, it kind of leads me into the story that I picked to read this week. This was something that was submitted to the Castle of Spirits website in August of 2006. But I think that it has a long shelf life as far as chill factor goes.
Most of these stories do.
Indeed, they do. This one is called Fire Tower Hill. And it goes a little something like this. This is a local urban legend that I've heard many times over my life. There are several stories about this place, and I will share some with you. The hills reside in southern Maury County, Tennessee. They're surrounded by dense wilderness, and somewhere in those woods are 2 cemeteries. At the top of the highest hill it stands, a lonely sentinel forgotten by modern man, the Fire Tower. Here are just a few stories about this place. The Burnt Church. Back during the 1800s, there was an old Gothic church that once stood near one of the lost cemeteries. Once the Civil War broke out, the church became dormant, except for the occasional meetings there for children and worship and song. One day, a Union arsonist burned the church down with the children still locked inside. Within time, it was forgotten until the roads were built and many motorists reported seeing children running out in front of the cars. There were also claims that people's radios would pick up the faint transmission of children crying. Then there's the Man of the Woods. Since long before the Civil War, there were reports of a wild man that roamed the hills. He was tall, deformed, and had dark pits for eyes. People would sometimes say that they heard his unearthly wails in the dark clutches of the night. Then, for a while, he disappeared, almost as if he were swallowed up by the woods he roamed. Then, more than 100 years later, he returned. In 1971, the people who lived in the woods began to report their pets and chickens being mutilated by something. A guy was taking his girlfriend through the hills one night when his car suddenly died. He got out to check under the hood, but in the woods, he kept hearing trees snap. He got back into his car and tried to start it. When it did finally come on, he saw a massive creature on the hood of his car. He began to drive as fast as he could, but he couldn't shake the thing. It finally jumped off when they neared the edge of the woods. Then there's the fire tower itself. The construction for the fire tower began in 1953. The contractors were to build a road and power lines leading up to the tower site. The construction soon came to a halt when the workers complained of their tools missing and that someone within the woods kept calling their names. The tower itself got completed in 1956. It had no electricity, and the only means of light came from an old kerosene lantern. The first night the tower was used, the guards kept seeing fires in the distance, but upon further investigation, there wasn't even any singed grass at the location of the supposed fires. After their first night of watch, they noticed that on the support beams of the tower, someone had burned strange markings, but no one could have possibly been down there because they would have easily been seen. The fire tower was closed in 1958 because the guards began to disappear from it. And finally, the deacon. In the early 70s, a strange cult began to meet there. They were led by a man named Abraham Marley. Marley was the Charles Manson of Tennessee. Many people still recall him to this day. Marley met his end when he led the cult to a family's house and slaughtered them, sparing only their newborn son, whom Marley took back into the woods with him. The police tracked down the cult only to find a mass suicide. Only Marley still remained. Before the police could apprehend him, he doused himself in gasoline and burned himself to death. One of the policemen said, "The flames were white, hotter than any fire I've ever seen. I was 15 feet away, but it burned my face just to look at it." To this day, the child's whereabouts are unknown, but there have been reports of farmers seeing a young man walking through their fields late at night or looking through windows at people as they sleep. Fire Tower Hill has remained silent for a while. Nobody lives there, and nobody goes there. The land is cursed and full of evil. The fire tower to this day still looks down on the hills. And thank you to Anonymous, somewhere in the USA, obviously Tennessee, for submitting Fire Tower Hill back in August of 2006. If you want to read it for yourself, you can read it at castleofspirits.com. I myself tried to do a little research on this Abraham Marley. I couldn't find anything. And so if anybody out there has ever heard of Fire Tower Hill,
Yeah, it was terrifying.
or Abraham Marley in Tennessee, get in touch and let us know what you know about this, because I'm interested in learning a little bit more about it.
Those were all great stories, though. I want to know more about all of that. The workers hearing their names being called in the woods, that's horrifying. And then it was so bad that it shut down, 4 years later?
Yeah. That would qualify to me as probably one of the most haunted places in the world.
It was, yeah, it's pretty great. I wanted to, while you were reading it, I kept thinking, oh man, we should be sitting around a campfire right now. It was really good. Very well written. Thank you, Anonymous.
Yeah. And if you're still out there and you got more stories about your area, please share them. Give us an update. Anybody else out there have heard of something similar happening in your hometown haunts or your hometown urban legends?
Yep.
Share them with us, and we'll share them with everybody else.
That's right. We want it, people. Give it to us.
Please.
Now.
Add a please.
No. Just now. Please. Now
you sound desperate and hungry and thirsty and whatever it is that the kids are saying these days.
So I have another story.
Do you? All right. I would hear of this story.
So everybody, please bear with me. I am not, in fact, from the country of Greece, but this story is. So I may mispronounce some things. Sorry. This story is called Old Vampire, and it was submitted by Panagiotta Kalfouzou in Amanthia, Greece, in September of 2003. I have a story, a vampire story, actually, and a real one at that I heard from my grandfather, or should I say, I am now and then hearing from my grandfather, because he is quite old now and really likes to tell over and over again the same story, which is this. When he was young, he used to travel to the neighboring villages to visit friends. He usually left his home, his mom's and dad's home, at noon and wasn't back until next day. That is, he used to sleep in his friends' houses rather than make his way home in the dead of the night. You see, he is not only superstitious, but a great coward, too. Well, one afternoon, he decided to pay a visit to a friend of his at a nearby village, about 4 kilometers away from ours. He had to cross through the fields in order to get there, and remember, no streetlights, no electricity back then. As he was walking, he saw in front of him at some distance a tall old man walking slowly. He couldn't make out who the person was. When he approached him, the old man turned and greeted him. Now, Grandpa, who by the time he was not Grandpa at all, just a young man in his 20s, if I have not mentioned it already, greeted him back, making at once the following thought. Well, I do not know who he is, and I, of course, know everyone in the village. AKA, he is a stranger. AKA, better be careful. They continued their walk together. The old man started talking and mumbling and saying he had paid a visit to his sister and now he was heading home. "What's the name of your sister?" Grandpa asked. And when he got his answer, he thought that there was no lady in the village by that name. The guy continued mumbling and talking about persons he knew from the village and gossiping about their lives, but Grandpa knew none of them. The old man even talked about houses and places that did not exist, at least there, then. He was tall, as I said before, looking old and kind of drained, and very peculiar. At some point, Grandpa started having a very bad feeling for the old man because he presumed that he may be a lunatic or something. A second thought was that the old man was just having a secret affair at the village, and he was mumbling a whole lot of lies just in order to cover himself. Anyway, Grandpa, the brave, decided that it was better to leave the old man behind somehow. It was already dark, and he didn't want to take his chances about anything. He said to his fellow walker that he should step aside to answer nature's call. He entered some bushes near the road, and then, well, he just made his way to another path. But soon he got lost. He was wandering through the fields and could not find his way. An hour later, he decided it was better for him to head back home instead of trying to go to his friends. Yes, eventually, he failed again to find his way. As he was walking in the fields, he saw a lamp in the distance. Getting closer, he saw what appeared to be an oil lamp hanging from a remote tree, almost covered by bushes. Okay, he thought, there's a fellow villager working late on his field. I'll go there and ask directions. Is anybody there? He yelled and approached the tree. Nobody was there, but then the old man's head appeared from behind the bushes, evil grin on his face and all, and he said, "My dear lad, where have you been? I've lost you." By now, Grandpa was shaking with fear, absolutely convinced that the old man was a vampire. How else could he make his way so fast to where I was? Impossible. Not even the wind rides so fast. He turned and ran all the way, looking back and shouting profanities to the vampire and urging him not to follow, which he didn't. At last, Grandpa arrived to the village just before dawn and went home. His sister remembers to this day how shaken he was. He could not say a word about what had happened to him. Yeah, okay. But did this really happen to him, or was he just having hallucinations imposed by fear? It's up to you to decide. Thanks for reading my grandpa's story. So thank you again to Panagiota Kalfuzu in Amanthia, Greece, for submitting Old Vampire in September of 2003.
That was awesome. That was a good story.
Yeah, I liked it.
A little vampire, a little bit of... It sort of reminded me of an old black and white.
Yeah.
I
Like
don't
an
know.
Ingmar Bergman movie or something.
Yeah, but throw in some possible vampires.
Yeah, I kind of did get a little Seventh Seal vibe off of the
Oh yeah, yeah,
off
definitely.
of the old guy. But I liked that story because, I mean, it's creepy, but it also reminds me a little bit of one of the stories in one of the 3 scary stories to tell in the dark books. It's just a quick little story, paraphrasing basically. The storyteller's uncle was walking down a dark road one night and saw another man walking on the same road. And it keeps saying, my uncle looked at the man, and the man looked at my uncle. My uncle was afraid of the man, and the man was afraid of my uncle. And they kept going down the road. And again, my uncle looks at the man looks at my uncle. My uncle was very afraid of the man, and the man was very afraid of my uncle. And just, I think that those kinds of stories are fun because, there's this kind of innate mistrust that we have in strangers. And all it really takes is a spooky setting.
So what happens in the story? How does it end?
Well, I mean, like so many of the stories in the scary stories to tell in the dark books end, it's directing you to jump and like yell and scare your friends.
Okay, so it wasn't like he was walking past a mirror or
no,
sort of...
Yeah, just a big long mirror that lined this country road.
Well,
mile-long mirror.
Now you see how my mind operates sometimes.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
It really doesn't. But, if the guy was talking about the town, the people and places and things that weren't actually there, what else do you assume? That he's just being a weirdo or that he's a vampire?
Do you believe in vampires? What do you think? I mean, I certainly believe that there are people in the world who enjoy being in that world and maybe have
the vampire cosplay type. Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing. But I'm talking about the actual creature of the night that comes back with the thirst for human blood and that sort of thing.
I think anything's possible. I don't know. I think that anyone who tells you they're a vampire, maybe be a little suspicious of them and cautious. Just step away, back off. Don't get too close because they might have a knife. But
no, they're just going to have sharp teeth.
I don't know
just
about
don't let
that.
them get close enough to bite.
Spirit Halloween doesn't sell sharp teeth. But like there's so many stories from history, and so much effort went into preventing vampires from rising from the grave that I feel like there has to be a grain of truth to it somewhere, I mean, people are still unearthing graves to this day where there's a brick that's like shoved into the mouth. The skeleton has a brick shoved in its mouth, and that was to prevent the vampire from coming back and biting someone. Or, the head is removed and it's placed down between the feet. That was another thing that they would do. Or, there's stakes through the hearts. I mean, we're finding all kinds of crazy things still to this day. And I don't feel like if it were a kind of a lore from a specific region and the only place you found it was like, let's just say Transylvania for, the sake of argument. If that were the only place that you found any kind of vampire legends and these skeletons with these kinds of mutilations to them, then you could easily say, well, it was just something that was happening in that location. But these stories, they're worldwide. Every single culture has stories about vampires, whether they call them vampires or not. Even into North America, there's vampire stories all over this continent, and I feel like that has to come from somewhere.
I don't believe vampires.
Okay.
Not traditional vampires, not Bram Stoker vampires.
Sure, of course.
But I just think never underestimate both the gullibility of people and also the power of fear to bring things that aren't into being.
Sure. But then, you still have to ask the question, like, why do all of these cultures so far removed by both time and distance all over the world come to the same conclusion?
Yeah, but at the same, you could also say, why do all these cultures from all over the world build pyramids? And I think that
that's another good question.
And I certainly don't think that it means that UFOs came to Central America, to North America, to Egypt, and told them build these structures. I just think that it's some sort of an evolutionary thing that the human hive mind came to. And I think that probably that's the same thing. We are, after all, a very small island in the vast universe.
Oh, yeah.
Just because there are oceans separating peoples does not mean that ideas can't be communicated. I believe that the possibility that ideas could be communicated across vast distances without actually speaking, without language.
Well, sure. Energy is energy. But also, I think, to your point, another explanation could be made that people are pretty much the same, from person to person, culture to culture, throughout the eons. So it's not too far off to think that all of the cultures could come up with pyramids, or all the cultures could come up with vampires, because we're all using essentially the exact same brain, the exact same processing methods, and
the experience of being human.
Exactly. So maybe those just are very natural things for us to invent or to land on as an explanation, because that's how the human brain works. So,
having said that, I totally believe in zombies, though. And it's going to happen one day. Zombie apocalypse, and I'm going to be ready.
This again. I was hoping we didn't have to have the zombie apocalypse is coming conversation on the podcast.
Hey, it's just wishful thinking, okay?
I know.
Just leave me alone. Let me have my little dreams.
So anyway, that was a long digression about vampires. Vince, do you have yet another story for us?
I do, in fact. And this story touches upon a topic that is quite terrifying to a lot of people. In the very title, it is called The Convent.
Ooh.
Submitted by Anonymous in Texas, USA, in January of 2010. My girlfriend and I had gone out on a date in a city about 45 miles from where we lived. On the way home, I just wanted to have some fun and scare her, so I told her that I was going to show her this haunted convent that I'd heard about and was supposedly haunted. That was all I knew. I turned off the interstate highway and was driving through this small town looking for the abandoned convent. I'd seen the convent from the interstate during the day, but had never actually driven into town to find it. While driving through this small West Texas town, I told my girlfriend a bogus story about how all of the nuns had been killed by a deranged man many years ago, and this was why the convent had been closed. I was setting the mood for a really good scare. I had a general idea of where it was, but having a difficult time finding it. We drove for several minutes, and I was just about to give up when I said, "Let's try this street." I turned right, and I was driving slowly when I saw a ghostly figure floating across the road about a half a block ahead of us. Startled, I stopped the car and immediately asked my girlfriend if she had seen anything at all, and she replied with a resounding yes. So I asked her to describe what she had just seen, and she began describing exactly what I had seen. It looked like a woman gliding across the street in a long black robe. About halfway across the street, she turned her head and looked directly at us and then turned away. You couldn't make it out from the face, but you could tell it was the clothing of a nun because of the white around the face. The transparent figure continued across the street and disappeared to the left behind some trees. This entire episode lasted approximately 5 to 7 seconds, I sped up the car and turned left to see if I could catch another glimpse of this fog-like figure. When I turned left, there it was, the convent that I had been looking for and couldn't find. The ghostly nun had helped us find our destination. It seems as if this little joke that I was playing on my girlfriend had backfired on me, and I was probably more scared than she was. Serves you right. I put the car in reverse and immediately sped away. I have never believed in ghosts or anything like that, but I cannot explain what I saw that night. The girl that I was with me that night has been my wife now for 20 years, and we have told that story many times. It still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Well, congratulations, Anonymous in Texas, USA, on your nuptials and on that terrifying story. Yeah. I'm surprised she married you after you tried to scare the hell out of her that way and it backfired on you. But maybe it was the nun that brought you together.
They do say nuns make the heart grow fonder.
Is that what they say?
I've heard it.
I thought it was something else.
I heard it just now when I said it.
Convents make the blood run cold. That's
yes,
another one.
That is a factual
Especially
statement.
abandoned convents in West Texas with floating nuns hanging around outside. I don't know about that, man.
Yeah.
That's something. I need to know where this place is. Mm-hmm. Hey, Anonymous, I know you're still out there.
Yeah.
And by now, you've been married for, oh my God, this was written in 2010. So.
Mm-hmm. Happy 13th anniversary.
No, they've been married for 20 years as of 2010. So now they've been married for 33 years.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Wow. How do they do it?
Nuns are creepy. It's not a statement about religion. It's a statement about when you see a nun gliding down somewhere where there shouldn't be a nun, it's creepy.
No, I thought you were going to say, when you see a nun, you run.
Run from nuns. Mm-hmm. But the image that I got when he was describing the woman in black gliding across the street and turning her face toward them, and having the white around the outside, it was like the negative image of Vince. Remember the super terrifying episode of the old Unsolved Mysteries, the old Resurrection Mary episode?
Oh, yes. We talked about that before.
Yeah, where they're driving down the street and they see this woman glowing in white. And as they go past her, the lady turns her head and looks, and her face is just a big black hole. So this was like the antithesis of that.
Exactly. Anytime you see any floating woman doing anything, it's usually going to be terrifying.
Yeah.
Hey, Jane.
Hey, Vince.
Did you know, over in YouTube land, this was for our episode 3 Tales of Strange Disappearances. It was a bonus episode, or an extrasode, as we like to call them. We had some really cool comments from very recently.
Okay.
3 months ago, Jeff wrote, "Hi, I'm really enjoying the Castle of Spirits podcast. I've listened to all the past episodes and I can't wait for the next one."
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And from 1 month ago, we had a really cool comment from NPC something or other. It says, "You guys are amazing."
Aw, they noticed.
As a skeptic, it is difficult to find paranormal related podcasts that aren't made by people who are way too gullible and read too much into the tiniest things. While I understand you guys are believers, you're also playful about it. You're not religious about it. It's difficult to describe, but it's pleasant for both skeptics and believers, I would say. Your voices are podcast gold.
Well,
you're too kind.
I think they mean my voice, and then they were just being nice and lumping you into that
Or
too.
maybe calling mine voices whenever my voice cracks and it goes into 2 different octaves. Anyway, he continues, "Difficult to fathom that this channel has only 227 subscribers. I think in the intervening time, we've gone up a little bit. When all these sensational nonsense channels have thousands, maybe millions.
Yeah.
Best of luck. Looking forward to more. Thank you very much, NPC, whoever you are."
Thank you. That was so nice.
That kind of feedback is really, we make this
bolstering.
podcast. Yeah, we make this podcast kind of a bit in a void. We don't really have a lot of outside influence, and we're kind of just going along doing what we enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think as long as we enjoy what we're doing, it's going to be cool.
Yeah. We're mostly just doing it because we have fun doing it, and it's
an excuse to sit down a day off or an evening off and turn the lights off and draw the curtains and read scary stories to each other.
Yes. While Vince is in his underwear.
I'm not in my underwear. What are you talking about?
Not this time.
Well, you don't have to paint a picture. For God's sake, we're trying to improve our audience, not scare them away. I'm fully clothed, ladies and germs.
So I know if you enjoy the YouTube videos, unfortunately, I know that I'm a little behind on getting the most recent episodes out there. So I will work on that and get those up. But in the meantime, there's a few.
And for the diehard listeners, we are happy to report that since last week, Jane has indeed...
I have kicked the COVID.
Gone through COVID. Went through it pretty quickly.
Yeah, not too bad.
No, and I already hear the bells are ringing, the music is happening in the background, which means that the ghosts are calling us to be fed, to be kept.
You have to feed the ghosts tonight because Wild Eyes freaked me out too much. And there's that one ghost, you know, the one that hangs out in the back?
Yeah.
I can't. His eyes...
Philo. His name is Philo.
Is that what his name is?
I've given him that name. So,
okay.
I mean, I think he likes it. So far, so good.
All right. Well, you have to feed the ghosts tonight because Wild Eyes did me in.
All right. I am off to do the unthinkable now and feed those ghosts. In the meantime, we encourage everybody to keep listening, keep staying scared.
And keep your ghosts fed.
Indeed.